Get ready to face the truth that no one dares to tell. There is something beyond the end, a place where guilt and fear take shape and nothing is what it seems. If you believe it all ends in the last sigh, this video will prove otherwise. This is where the real nightmare begins. Before we dive into this dark story, subscribe to the channel and leave your like now. This helps us continue bringing reports that move your perception. Come on, it's time to find out what really awaits us after the final goodbye. I could not say for sure when everything began to awaken. I felt as if it emerged from a dream, but soon I captured that the nightmare had barely began. The air around me was suffocating in a dense bruma and damp. The floor was rough and cold, and everything there I seemed devoid of life. I tried to lift myself, but my legs seemed emptied of energy, as if I had lost all the strength they had. Once I had no idea where I found me, every detail around me. It was bizarre. I saw what should be rubble from an old place, buildings in trenched walls, and a silence almost as heavy as the air I suck. There was no wind or a sign of existence, just a fine echo of murmurs, as if shadows whispers with the other. My head throbbed. I tried to rescue fragments of what had happened before waking up there, but everything was alive almost, as if a part of me suspected something terrible that had happened, but I was unable to achieve this memory. A feeling of cold fear walked through my spine. Was not the dread inhabited by an immediate danger, but a deeper agony of something I still unknown. I moved on aimlessly to the bruma thickened with each step, and the shadows seemed to slide on the periphery of my vision, as if my feet were watching in damp land, and in certain instant I swore I listened to my back, but when I turned, no one was at this moment that I realized it was isolated, completely wondered what meant that would be killed. This possibility shaken me, but on the other hand fitting, because everything around seemed dead. Also the buildings, the soil, the dense air. But if I really had died, because I still felt the weight of fear burning in my chest made straight. It didn't happen much until someone found me, or better, until I was found in the middle of that fog. A figure came towards me in slow steps, was a subject of common traits, but there was something dark in his gaze. Something I didn't capture it. If he introduced as Lucas, and his voice was quiet, almost comforting, although his presence turned on a strange restlessness. He declared that I was on the threshold, a place where spirits unable to progress are not prisoners, is not arrested, is not hell. Neither paradise is just an extension of what we brought inside us at the time. I did not understand, right? As soon as I retained. So I had died the questions if ran over my thoughts, but Lucas seemed to know all my doubts. He said he could guide me out of there, but that I would need to trust him and welcome his guidelines. To accept was my only way. After all that, another way I would have. We began to cross the desolate streets, and Lucas spoke little, but what said was enough to make me aware of the threshold is treacherous. Commented some that surrounded here for good. There was something in their intonation that displeased me, was as if kept secrets beyond what was willing to reveal. As we walked, Lucas tried to instruct me about that domain, explained that the threshold is not a fixed place, but a reflection of the psyche and emotions of each soul that falls. There the more tense is the fear, the guilt and the attachment, the denser and more suffocating the environment. You see this that way, because you ignore what really happened to you, he exposed. I wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that I was trying to help me, but my instinct I shouted a warning that there were not only my shadows there, but also the shadows of those who wandered through that space. As we proceeded, I realized that the landscape around turned the ruins behind, and the fog slowly proving to reveal a road track by disformed trees and dark rocks. The situation became increasingly disturbing. The shadows seemed to come to life, watching each step. I kept me near Lucas. He seemed to know the way, but his calm sounded more and more uncomfortable. Was a calm, empty, without any empathy, as if he had already witnessed so much suffering that nothing more shaken. The silence was oppressive, interrupted only by the echo of our steps over the dry land. You have not realized it is not Lucas broke the silence without even facing me. Tone of your speech expired, an uncomfortable certainty. The threshold is like a web, that inertia, those who cannot break their own chains, and you, my dear, drags, heavier chains than imagine. These words crossed my chest, but I tried to keep the composure of what is saying that chains, I asked, trying to sound firm. But deep down I sensed the answer. He referred to guilt, and the past that I was denying, all the mistakes that I made, shaped this scenario, he explained here. Do not escape. What if it is real? Kalele, striving to not face reality. I had always been manipulator, liked to lead people and situations, and now suspected that all this I had arrested there. As I tried to deal with this epiphany, I heard a distant rumor, as hidden whispers in those trees are very weak, but full of affliction. What it is, I asked, to hide my startled souls in perdition. Lucas spoke in this cycle long, and find no direction, not approach them. The warning was clear. But something inside me was attracted to those laments, almost as if you want to unravel your stories before I could move me toward them. Lucas held me by his arm, as cold as dark. I warned to stay away. His voice was firm, and something in me lit in suspicion. Who he was after all, he said to be there to help. But his attitude carried a threat trace. I chose to accompany him because the fear of walking alone surpassed my caution. With each step, the murmurs intensified, and in certain excerpts, it was possible to distinguish fragments of phrases, as if the voices revolved painful memories that did not cease. They populated my mind, diverting my attention, and I didn't miss the ground vibrate under my feet. I was unbalanced, almost falling, and Lucas fought the walk. The tremor didn't seem common. Something underground. If the air moved, it was heavy, and the fog has returned harder, surrounding that place as if you want to imprison us. We are close to the cliff, muttered Lucas. Less safe than before. It is not for anyone. You are sure that you are prepared? I asked involuntarily. My body froze when he answered. The cliff is pure darkness. There is no guarantee back. Since we approached, his voice sounded a warning on me. And what the hell we would go there, questioned, trying to suppress the growing dread. Lucas did not return. My question immediately limited. If facing the darkness seems that you will finally understand what is really the darkness around it, seemed to swallow the way and the sense of inevitability. Tell me, somehow I felt that entering that cliff meant discovering more than just shadows, but also an overwhelming certainty about who I was. We went on, and the weather became even heavier. The sky closed in an almost black tone, and the trees leaned their branches like arms trying to capture the air. Was dense, and each step meant a fight against resistance, almost as if the ground itself pushed me to. How long this will last, to get Lucas between one sigh and another. Time does not work here, as you know. He has not always counted what is told in hours is worth this place. The more it was, the less force you will have to leave. This explanation shook me. The notion that I could be entangled by my own emotions was chilling. Wondered if there would be escape from that limbo, or if I carried something so dark that I tied me there forever. So we heard a new noise. Was no longer the murmur of the voices, but something deep and bestial that made the floor vibrate with each pulsing. Walking became even more complicated, looking that the earth wanted to arrest us. Lucas made a signal, and I told me softly, we are already close. To a certain tension in his voice right now. He did not appear so much confidence in what would come later at this moment. I glimpsed inaccurate figures in the distant sills of spirits wandering aimlessly. Some seemed to replace the same circular trail, others succumbed to the floor, caping their ears as if they wanted to block some intense pain. It was amazing to see those empty features marked by despair. A cold traveled my body. I hesitated to approach myself, but Lucas advanced without slowing down. And if I was alone, it would be worse. Who they are, asked to disguise the tremor of the voice souls without any remnants of hope. He explained softly, in a cycle of obsessions drowned in remorse or fears, have already forgotten what it is to exist without it, and believe that there will never be escape. I confess that I felt a suffocating anguish. Given this perspective, I feared becoming one of them if I found no other possibility. But the question continued hammering in my alternative head, where after all, finally we reached a clear limit. The fog suddenly retreated, showing a deep slit in the soil. The cliff was an apparent endless abyss, like a black well that swallowed all the light and any sense of optimism. There was something disturbingly familiar in that moat, was as if I was there before or knew that my path would culminate in this bank. You realize this place does not realize, Luke uttered by staring at darkness, is what is left when your illusions are shattered, when you can no longer get away from the essence of what if it is. I turned the confused face, and who I am, in the end, questioned. My voice came out. Lucas failed, but not hostile. You were always a calculating who believed to have power over everything and everyone, but on the threshold, the control is just an echo. Enzo, here you find the truth that avoided all my life. I felt like it had taken a full blow. Until then, I nourished the illusion that I could control the situation. But I came across the naked reality. The true enemy was inside me. But I had no time to digest it because guttural noise returned, even more vigorous, and the earth was violently rocked. Pebbles plummeted in the slit by the litter. Lucas grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me away. "We can't take long here," he said, the clear urgency in the voice the cliff reacts to. What we feel, the more dread or guilt you feed. The more strong is trying to breathe and hold his mind. But how to retain a terror that seemed to be born from the depths of my being? I almost heard the abyss call me. My heart fired, and at that moment I realized that the precipice was not merely a crater. He was part of me, one reflection of everything I had suppressed. Lucas turned to me with serious countenance. "Has been time to make your decision. Can continue to run away or face what is before you. But if choosing the escape, this emptiness will be your eternal address." I stared at the dark, and for a moment I felt a certain strangeness. If I handed it, would be the end or the beginning of something even worse. But I realized that I had no choice but to deal with it. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the darkness, the wind howling, lifting soil fragments. The tension was absurd, and I sensed an imminent revelation. "You really believe that it can dribble everything that made Enzo?" he said, and there was a touch of contempt in his voice. This time turned, if slowly, to face me. "Glowing darkness, for how long you thought your tricks would be covered?" The impact of words hit me so far, I was trying to reduce the weight of what I had caused, but in front of the cliff everything seemed to emerge, and as if to prove it, figures sprouted from the dim, spinning figures, but I recognized were people who hurt throughout life. Now were not just memories, were remindfulness of what I provoked you, took people to the despair. Enzo, Lucas continued with the voice hovering in the air. "You played puppet without measuring the consequences, and now it is being confronted by each of them." The shadows began to murmur and lament in a deafening way. At first were unintelligible whispers, but soon distinguishing words loaded from grudge. You pushed those who could no longer bear hidden lies. With each accusation, I retreated, attempted denying, but my own being knew it was true. The shadows surrounded me. Their empty faces translated an endless agony. There is no way to get around. Lucas, cross my field of vision here. You face what did. The memories came back like a flood. I recalled a partner who entrusted me blindly and how manipulated it until I exhausted any hope at my headquarters for power. I ignored his limits, and he eventually destroyed his shattered family, begged for help. But I followed as if it weren't for my problem. And now I understood that each click closed me. He had chained this moment late to escape again. My body gave way. I knelt on the rough floor, unable to endure the sum of everything. I felt tears burn my eyes, tried to articulate something, but there were no sentences that could change the past. Lucas bent and said, "Redemption requires a first step, admitting what he did, from hence something can start moving." I closed my eyes, staring at the abyss, and in his reflection I saw my own mistakes. I stared at my worst fear and decided to speak. I ruined people. I used each one for my gain, and I didn't care about the consequences. My voice hesitated, but I needed to free those words. It was like breaking a dam. Everything I kept suffocated for so long emerged in confessional. Lucas erected me with a certain gravity. This is just the beginning, but it is something. Suddenly the soil trembled again, but it was different. The shadows retreated. The once oppressive air seemed to gain a breath of lightness even. What a brief then a wind was thrown back and had to close my eyes. The crash was scary, and the wind tried to throw me into the gap. I felt a palpable displacement in the environment when the silence returned, and I was gone to the eyes. Luke had disappeared, and with him his own abyss was nothing more like before. I spotted a ruined village. The buildings in shakes and silence echoed, as if the scenario were regretting something. I remained there a long time. I couldn't say if it was months or decades. I ended up getting fond of that empty landscape. I lived daily with the figures of my victims and relived the pain I generated. I understood that I kept myself in this cycle, that myself was my jailer. With time, learned to act as a kind of guide to other spirits who came to the threshold. I talked about darkness, about the cliff, and the fact that the first step of the change was to recognize their own wounds and mistakes was in this heavy but resigned routine, that one day something changed as I rested in the rubble. I felt an inexplicable desire to leave, was used to the grayish tone, to the weight of guilt, but something pulled my body. Beyond the dim light, when I walked away from that desolate scenario, I noticed that the bruma had dissipated and the sky had a soft tone of light. There was a live green pradaria, and the air was clear. I remained there without moving a muscle. I felt that something inside me changed the real meaning. But there was a sense of truce after so much time of punishment, and perhaps the beginning of a different walk. And now I was ready to take this step.